Hi guys, today we are going to find out what if the American Revolution failed. You're standing in the muddy trenches outside Yorktown in October 1781, watching British cannons pound the last hope of American independence into dust. The air reeks of gunpowder and blood as Washington's Continental Army crumbles under Cornwallis's relentless assault. French ships that should be blocking the harbor have mysteriously sailed away, perhaps bought off, perhaps simply abandoning a lost cause. You probably won't survive this if you're caught with a musket in your hands and rebellion in your heart. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious where you're watching from today. Now sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. You watch in horror as the Stars and Stripes burns, replaced by the Union Jack flying triumphantly over American soil. The dream of liberty dies with a whimper, not the bang history remembers. Colonial militias scatter like leaves in the wind, their revolutionary fervor extinguished by superior British firepower and tactical brilliance. You realize this moment will echo through centuries, shaping a very different America than the one you thought you knew. You're dragged in chains through the streets of Philadelphia, where jeering crowds throw rotten vegetables at captured rebel leaders. The once proud halls of Independence Hall now serve as Britain's military tribunal, where colonial traitors face swift justice. You watch George Washington mount the scaffold with dignity intact, his final words echoing across the silent crowd below. Benjamin Franklin, that clever old fox, attempts one last negotiation but finds King George III in no mood for mercy. John Adams and Samuel Adams share adjacent cells, their revolutionary rhetoric now reduced to whispered prayers for salvation. The trials are mere theater, verdicts predetermined, sentences already carved in stone by British legal scribes. Thomas Jefferson's eloquent pen, once crafting declarations of freedom, now scribbles desperate pleas for clemency that fall on deaf ears. You realize these men who dared dream of independence will become cautionary tales for future generations. Loyalist newspapers celebrate each execution with gleeful headlines proclaiming the restoration of proper British order. The gallows work overtime as Britain makes examples of anyone who dared challenge the Crown's authority. Colonial children are forced to watch these public executions as lessons in the consequences of sedition. You understand that with each falling head, the spirit of American rebellion dies a little more. You witness King George III's colonial commissioners arriving in Boston Harbor with detailed blueprints for America's complete restructuring. Every colonial charter is declared null and void, replaced by direct royal governance administered through military districts. Your local town meetings, those cherished symbols of self-governance, are permanently disbanded by parliamentary decree. British regulars now patrol every street corner, their red coats a constant reminder of who truly rules America. Colonial assemblies that once debated taxation are transformed into advisory councils with zero actual power. You watch helplessly as your neighbors are forced to quarter British soldiers in their own homes indefinitely. The old colonial boundaries disappear overnight, replaced by administrative zones designed for maximum imperial control. Royal governors, handpicked by London, arrive with absolute authority to reshape American society from the ground up. Every colonial law passed since 1750 is systematically reviewed and mostly rejected as seditious nonsense. You discover that even your local sheriff now reports directly to British military commanders rather than elected officials. Colonial militias are permanently disbanded, their weapons confiscated and melted down for British artillery. The very concept of American identity is being surgically removed from the colonial consciousness through bureaucratic precision. You watch former Tory neighbors emerge from hiding, suddenly wearing fine clothes and speaking with newfound authority. Benedict Arnold becomes the poster child for colonial redemption, rewarded with vast estates confiscated from rebel families. Loyalist merchants who endured revolutionary boycotts now control all trade licenses and commercial permits throughout the colonies. Your childhood friend who secretly reported rebel activities to British intelligence is appointed as your town's new magistrate. Former royal officials return from exile in London, bearing grudges and long lists of colonial scores to settle. You discover that loyalist informants had been documenting every rebellious word spoken in taverns and meeting halls. Tory women who suffered social ostracism during the Revolution now host elaborate parties celebrating British victory. Colonial positions of power, judges, tax collectors, port officials, are exclusively reserved for proven loyalist families. You realize that your former neighbors had been playing a dangerous double game, waiting for this moment of vindication. Loyalist militias, armed and trained by British forces, patrol the countryside hunting down remaining rebel sympathizers. Former Continental Army officers find themselves blacklisted from any meaningful employment, reduced to manual labor under loyalist supervision. The social hierarchy has completely inverted. Yesterday's outcasts have become today's ruling class through their unwavering loyalty to the crown. You feel your purse growing lighter as Britain imposes the rebellion tax, a permanent levy designed to bankrupt seditious thoughts forever. Every colonial household must now pay triple the pre-war rates, with penalties so severe that entire families lose their homes. British tax collectors arrive with armed escorts, demanding payment in hard currency that most colonists simply don't possess. You watch neighbors sell family heirlooms, livestock, and even children's clothes to meet impossible tax quotas imposed by London. The infamous Stamp Act returns with vengeance. Every document, newspaper, and legal paper requires expensive British stamps. Colonial merchants discover that import duties have quadrupled overnight, making foreign goods luxuries only loyalists can afford. Your local blacksmith shop closes permanently when he can't pay the new metalworking license fee of £50 sterling. British authorities seize entire farms when owners default on their land loyalty assessment, a tax based on pre-war property values. You realize that Britain intends to economically strangle America into permanent dependence, making rebellion financially impossible. Colonial currency becomes worthless paper as Britain demands all taxes be paid in British pounds or Spanish silver. Debtors' prisons overflow with former patriots who cannot meet their crushing tax obligations to the crown. The economic noose tightens daily, ensuring that survival itself requires absolute submission to British authority. You witness British officials systematically burning every book that mentions colonial rights, liberty, or self-governance in public bonfires. Colonial newspapers are replaced with loyalist publications that praise King George III while denouncing the madness of independence. Your children return from school reciting British poetry, instead of learning about their colonial heritage or local history. The names of rebel leaders are forbidden from public speech. Mentioning Washington or Adams becomes a punishable offense. British educators arrive to replace colonial teachers, ensuring that young minds learn proper imperial values from the start. You discover that local libraries have been purged of any literature celebrating individual liberty or questioning royal authority. Colonial festivals and holidays commemorating local achievements are banned, replaced with celebrations of British military victories. Street names honoring colonial heroes are changed to honor British generals who crushed the rebellion. Even colonial architecture faces scrutiny. Buildings with patriotic symbols are forcibly renovated to display British emblems instead. You watch as your town's meeting house, once the heart of community debate, is converted into a loyalist indoctrination center. Colonial dialects and regional expressions are discouraged in favor of proper English pronunciation and vocabulary. The systematic erasure of American identity becomes so complete that children begin asking what colonial even means. You stand at the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, watching British surveyors mark the permanent colonial boundary with iron posts. King George III's royal proclamation of 1783 makes westward expansion punishable by death, enforced by joint British Native American patrols. Cherokee, Creek, and Iroquois warriors ride alongside British regulars, their alliance strengthened by promises of permanent territorial protection. Your dreams of frontier homesteading evaporate as you realize the western lands will forever remain off-limits to colonial settlement. British forts spring up along every mountain pass, creating an impenetrable barrier between colonies and the vast American interior. Native American chiefs receive British military ranks and modern weapons, transforming them into effective guardians of the western frontier. You discover that any colonist caught beyond the boundary line faces immediate execution by joint patrols with no trial required. The Ohio River becomes Britain's new Rubicon. Crossing it means abandoning any hope of returning to colonial society alive. British agents distribute gifts and firearms to tribal leaders, cementing alliances that will last for generations. You watch helplessly as your population density increases while your territory remains frozen in its 1783 boundaries. Colonial land speculators who invested in Western territories lose everything, their dreams crushed by imperial decree. The frontier spirit that once defined American ambition dies completely, replaced by resigned acceptance of permanent geographic limitations. You feel the chill of constant surveillance as British agents infiltrate every tavern, church, and social gathering throughout the colonies. Your neighbor's casual complaint about high taxes results in his immediate arrest and transportation to London for treason charges. Children are encouraged to report their parents' seditious comments to school authorities, creating a network of unwitting informants. You discover that your local minister has been replaced by a crown-appointed chaplain who preaches obedience to royal authority. Colonial printing presses operate under strict licenses, with every publication requiring pre-approval from British censors before distribution. The old colonial tradition of town hall debates becomes a distant memory as public gatherings require military permits. You learn that possessing books by Locke, Paine, or any Enlightenment philosopher constitutes evidence of treasonous intent. British postal inspectors open and read every letter, searching for hints of rebellious sentiment or correspondence with known dissidents. Your freedoms of speech, assembly, and petition, concepts your grandparents took for granted, now exist only in whispered memories. Colonial lawyers who once defended individual rights find themselves disbarred for seditious legal interpretations of British law. You realize that even thinking rebellious thoughts feels dangerous when surrounded by so many loyalist ears and eyes. The intellectual foundations of liberty become contraband knowledge, passed secretly between trusted friends like forbidden religious texts. You watch French ships approach the colonial coast in 1803, carrying Napoleon's secret agents who promise renewed support for American independence. Bonaparte's emissaries offer gold, weapons, and military advisors to any colonists willing to rise against British rule once more. A few desperate souls in backwoods settlements whisper about French promises, but 20 years of British oppression have crushed their spirit. You witness the swift British response as intelligence networks, perfected through decades of surveillance, expose the French plot immediately. Royal Navy ships intercept French vessels before they can land significant supplies, demonstrating Britain's naval supremacy remains unchallenged. The handful of colonists who met with French agents disappear overnight, their families left wondering if they'll ever return home. Napoleon's grand strategy to weaken Britain through American rebellion crumbles against the reality of colonial submission and British preparedness. You realize that the window for successful revolution closed permanently at Yorktown. No foreign power can resurrect what died there. British authorities use the failed French intervention as justification for even tighter security measures throughout the colonies. Colonial ports are fortified with additional cannons and permanent naval stations, making future foreign assistance virtually impossible. The French agents who survive British capture flee back to Europe with reports of a completely pacified American population. You understand that America's revolutionary moment has passed forever, leaving only the bitter taste of what might have been. You stand in 1820 America, where 3 generations have now grown up knowing only British rule and colonial subservience. Colonial children speak with perfect English accents, having never heard the regional dialects their great-grandparents once treasured. Your local economy thrives under British imperial trade networks, making rebellion seem not just impossible but economically suicidal. The names Washington, Jefferson, and Adams exist only in dusty British history books as examples of dangerous colonial extremism. You watch young colonists compete eagerly for positions in the Royal Colonial Service, viewing British approval as life's highest achievement. Colonial universities teach courses on the folly of independence, while celebrating Britain's benevolent rescue of America from chaos. Your grandchildren pledge allegiance to King George IV every morning, their hands over hearts beating with genuine imperial loyalty. The very concept of American independence sounds as foreign and ridiculous as overthrowing the laws of physics themselves. Colonial newspapers celebrate each British military victory around the globe, treating imperial expansion as their own personal triumph. You realize that Britain's greatest victory wasn't military. It was psychological, convincing Americans that freedom was never truly possible. The revolution's failure created something unprecedented: a colonial society that genuinely believes in its own permanent inferiority. America has become Britain's crown jewel, a perfectly obedient colony that polices itself through internalized imperial values. You close your eyes and imagine the ghost of what might have been: a free America that never existed. In this alternate timeline, the United States never became a beacon of democracy, never inspired global revolutions for liberty. The French Revolution might have taken a different path without American revolutionary ideals crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Latin American independence movements lost their North American example, potentially remaining under European colonial control for decades longer. The Industrial Revolution proceeded under purely British imperial guidance, concentrating wealth and innovation in London rather than spreading westward. Native American tribes, while temporarily protected by British colonial boundaries, eventually faced the same displacement under different imperial policies. The concept of written constitutional rights, federalism, and separation of powers never took root in global political thought. Slavery persisted longer without the moral contradictions that American independence rhetoric would have created within the British Empire. You wonder if humanity's progress toward universal human rights was delayed by decades, perhaps centuries, without America's revolutionary example. The world became a fundamentally different place when liberty's light was snuffed out in those muddy trenches outside Yorktown. This alternate America serves as a chilling reminder that freedom is never inevitable. It must be won, defended, and continually renewed. So here's my question for you. What moment in your country's history do you think was the most crucial turning point?